Good morning. It's Monday, the 5th of November 2012. Welcome back, in fact, to UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studios. I'm your host today, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio is Mike Robinson, and we're going to be catching up on mainstream news and also trying to explain what we think is really now happening in Britain. One of the key issues, of course, that's come up over the last few weeks is the subject of paedophile activity around the BBC showman Jimmy Savile. But of course this is now expanding into a major police operation, and the key point is that we're not just seeing that we have celebrities involved in the abuse of children. We're now seeing the tentacles spread across to names that are coming out of the woodwork in our own political establishment. And of course one of the people that's been digging deep on this subject is Patrick Henningsen, who we should have with us now on Skype. And I believe Patrick has got some fairly stunning information to share with us about what has been happening around the paedophile scene at the moment and what is now starting to emerge about our own politicians. Are you there, Patrick?
Hi Brian, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Little bit distorted for me, but if it's okay, mainstream, that's fine.
Okay.
So, Patrick, what can you tell us? What's been going on over the last few days with regards to these, the exposure of Jimmy Savile and the reports of paedophile activity, not only, of course, within the showbiz world of BBC, but also within mainstream political parties?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the biggest news was last Friday. The BBC's Newsnight was due to run an expose, and all signals were pointing at the realization that they had a major top Tory powerful politician as a name. And the witness for the Newsnight investigation ended up, or the BBC, he named the person, but the BBC couldn't run that film because of threat of lawsuit, libel action. We've seen that before. And further investigation by people like the Daily Mail and so forth spoke to this gentleman who was a victim of paedophile gangs at a North Wales children's care home in the 70s. Now he's identified this particular powerful politician who was coincidentally also named by other children in a previous investigation in the 90s, a major inquiry into that incident. But at both times the police struck off these allegations as fantasy. Okay, so here we are, this is resurfaced again so many years later, and the BBC has been accused, maybe rightly by some people, as bottling the investigation. Michael Crick, Channel 4's Michael Crick, knows the name. The name is also known by the BBC team. The name is known by the police. But because of all these reasons, and you know, rightly or wrongly, we live in a nation of laws, and the law protects people against libel by the press. The name is not going to be known. And now Steve Mesham, the witness, has said on record that this top Tory powerful politician has also threatened to kill him if he dares mention his name. I don't know if that threat was made when he was a child or if it has been made recently. That wasn't so clear in the police correspondence that I read.
Right, well, of course, Patrick, this is a very difficult subject for many ordinary people. This is just really, it's nearly beyond their belief system that this sort of thing is going on. Not only dirty old men in raincoats, but we've now got people in high profile within the media, and now we've got talk about politicians. But of course, death threats are a standard part of grooming by paedophiles. So whether it's telling, whether they are telling a child that if the child doesn't acquiesce to what they want done, the child will be killed, or very often it's a friend of the child is threatened with being killed, or even pets, So this type of threat, which is being reported, of course, is not something which is extraordinary. That this is actually a standard part of this horrific activity by paedophiles, and I think it's important to flag this up with the press. What do you make of the situation at the moment? It seems to us here in the UK column that we've got the mainstream media still tending to focus on the fact that, well, all of this abuse was going on with Savile. He's dead. There may have been politicians involved, but they're dead as well. And we may have a living person, but of course nobody can mention that person. We seem very good at protecting people who are being accused, but we're not so good at protecting the children as victims. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, there's this powerful name. There's other names of living people currently known in a list kept by the police and also by an other independent investigations where victims have been coming forward in the last month. And it is a bit frightening to know that these lists of names exist right now today and may never ever see the public day of light. That's a frightening prospect. But as you know, Brian, from your research into this subject, this is a problem that seeps deep into institutions. Particularly, we're talking about public institutions like the government, like the police, the judiciary, and especially the child services. But on a positive note, I ran a story on 21st Century Wire yesterday that just outlined a new trend, which I think is very encouraging, especially for the alternative media. Now, the alternative media and the mainstream media seem to be two diametrically opposed bodies in terms of the media and the culture, but they seem to be coming together. And the thing that's galvanizing the mainstream media and the alternative media now, because the alternative media is having to take notice of things that have appeared first in the alternative media and the research of a lot of people, particularly Bill Maloney, for one. But just recently, the Daily Express has taken the side of my website, 21st Century Wire, and the threats it's had from the Cabinet Office for publishing related material to this subject, and also has supported David Icke's allegations, which were years ago, about Jimmy Savile and Ed Heath, and also, and that really verifies the work of Bill Maloney, who was on your show on October 11th. Now, on that interview, Brian, on this show, the UK Column Live, Bill Maloney laid out a series of statements that seemed outlandish on October 11th, and yesterday morning appeared in almost every major newspaper. And that is that Jimmy Savile had a relationship possibly with Peter Sutcliffe in Leeds, and also, you know, he was talking about other very dark and seedy aspects of this case, like necrophilia and many other details in Bill's interview. You can go encourage people to go back and listen to Bill's interview because it came out verbatim in the papers yesterday. So the mainstream media is paying attention to the hard work that's being done, and it's this subject of child abuse that has galvanized that, and I think that's a very positive trend.
So you're saying, Patrick, that essentially we're starting to see the first signs of mainstream media, particularly the mainstream newspapers, beginning to realise that the quality of the information that's coming out on alternative media is such that they feel that they can start to work together with us to tackle this issue of the child abuse?
Yeah, I think that is exactly what's happening, because there's no other issue like this. You know, people can have political opinions and divisions and differences of tribal political camps on things like war, on things like the war on terror, on other sort of scandals. But this scandal, child abuse and pedophilia, it touches home to people, and it's a common ground that breaks through all these barriers.
Right.
And I have to really, really compliment the writer for the Express, who also has a blog in the Daily Mail. Her name is Sonia Poulton, and I encourage people to Google her. She wrote a very powerful article last week in the Express, and which takes what appears to me, this is the first time I've seen an unwavering stance laid down with a hammer. That she said we should not expect anything less than total eradication of institutional pedophilia in this country, and I applaud her for that, and I think other people should. There are good people out there in the mainstream press who do have strong ethics and values, and are not just chasing the latest ambulance or story of the day. That really have strong fundamental principles that can create common ground throughout society. It's really important that we take this issue very seriously and not just as a passing news fad. And it's not, Jimmy Savile is the tip of a massive iceberg. That's what Bill Maloney was saying. That's what David Icke was saying. That's what a lot of people in the alternative media were saying long before the mainstream press had managed to get their head around the depths of depravity surrounding this particular pedophile fixer, this particular pimp known as Jimmy Savile.
Well, Patrick, thank you for that. So that there's no misunderstanding for our audience, it's the view of the UK column team that paedophilia is the control mechanism by which our senior politicians, members of the police force, and in some cases the judiciary are being controlled. So as we see this political agenda unfolding of the dismantling of this country, these people are being controlled by the fact that their activities in paedophilia, this is being held over them. I'm just going to call up briefly three slides here. We've taken some reports from the Daily Mirror. This one is commenting, of course, on the fact that the BBC is now being faced with 29 sex assault claims. But I'm just going to pick out of this article. The Mirror is picking up on the fact that the police have apparently still not searched Jimmy Savile's seaside flat on a common sense. With a common sense view, that appears incredible. It's also pointing out that a mystery buyer is offering well over the price for the flat. But significantly, the Mirror here is pointing out that neighbours are reporting that Jimmy Savile used to hold a Friday morning club which consisted of mainly police officer pals who met at his Leeds home, and they sometimes visited Scarborough. Now this for the UK column is particularly important information because it dovetails in with not only what we have been discovering through our own research, but the fact that we have police officers across the country who have been reporting that when they have been investigating and trying to get the lid off paedophile rings, the moment they establish that there are people connected in positions of power and influence, particularly in higher levels of the police, the judiciary and political circles, their investigations are closed down. And I'm going to say here, could it be that what the Mirror is highlighting here is that the police themselves are embedded in these paedophile rings, which is why it's been so difficult to actually get the lid off them. I'll just follow this on with a second Mirror report, and this is where we're talking about Labour MP Tom Watson's revelations that a senior minister close to Maggie Thatcher was involved in paedophile activity. Of course, this is referring to another person now deceased, but however, all of the people who are investigating this very, very dark subject are saying that the evidence shows quite clearly that the activity is not only going on today, it's going on a scale which is truly shocking. finally, just on this subject, we've got here, I think it's the Children's Commissioner in Wales is calling for an inquiry. It's quite interesting that slowly but surely this stuff is starting to expand into the mainstream press. And what I believe is going on is that people who've been controlled in the media up to now, they've learned a little bit, they've tried to publish stories, and then the editorial board are pulling it due to pressure from elsewhere. I think these people are beginning to come to the fore, and the same is beginning to happen with the police. But ultimately, if, as we believe, we're in the situation where senior British political people are involved in paedophile rings, and indeed paedophilia is being used to control the political activities of British politicians, this country is in a very, very serious situation unless we get to grips with it. Patrick, two things. One, we hope you'll join us on Thursday. And second one is, what would you say, what would your view be on dealing with this issue of what's going on in the country around the abuse of children? What should we be doing, do you think?
Well, I think it's a huge, people need to first come to grips and realize that this is a massive, massive institutional problem, and also to realize the reality that the child care industry, and it is an industry, and it's been an industrial farming industry regarding making vulnerable children available to predators and organized gangs of pedophiles at a very high price. Now, the cost of keeping a child in care in this country would be around £200,000 per year. That's a way in excess of the cost of a prisoner in Belmarsh at £30,000 a year. Okay, so it's a massive industry, such a big industry, in fact, that major investment banks and banks in this country are looking to acquire and invest in these child care homes because they're such profitable assets. So this puts the level of corruption so deep and so pervasive that if it's not looked into and perhaps completely overhauled, that this problem will continue to go on even after a line is drawn under a few dead convictions like Jimmy Savile, or perhaps another name that has been mentioned around is Sir Peter Morrison, and there's tons and tons of names. And the other thing I'm going to ask for, and I think this is very important, I'm going to call for, I would like the UK column also perhaps to consider calling for the lifting of the D notices that were slapped on by Tony Blair in 2002 under the guise of national security during Operation Orr, the transatlantic pedophile sweep conducted by the US and Britain. Now, some big names came up, and Tony Blair slapped a D notice on all of them for 100 years for national security, and his justification was, we're about to engage in a run-up with a war with Iraq, therefore this can't be put into the public arena at this time. Now, I think we can all agree that the Iraq war situation is no longer on, and this national security notice used by the Blair administration is irrelevant and has expired. And it is in the public interest for people to know who these people are, because this is a real national security issue, Brian. Yep. Is that there could be members of government who are blackmailable by foreign interests. Okay, and that is something that is should be of concern to Britain. And Britain can be hamstrung if there are people in politics, in government, in high positions that are blackmailable because of their involvement in organized pedophile activity. And that's something I think we should consider. I don't think that's out of the realms of making a reasonable suggestion. So some people might disagree with me, but I believe that this is important.
Well, I'm going to say some people may disagree with you, Patrick. I agree with you 100%, and we are very happy to state on air this morning, we've said it in other places, but we'll do it again this morning, that it is our opinion from our own research, plus the information we're getting from a wide range of people, that we are now seeing British political policy controlled by the use of not just the whip system to pull people into line, but in fact the key players are doing what they're doing because they are absolutely part of this paedophile situation. So my belief is that if we can encourage the police to do what they really should be doing and not to succumb to the close down on investigations, which has been seen repeatedly across the country, that if good policemen will stick with it, we will start to see the lid coming off this paedophile activities at the highest levels of the British establishment and government. And I think this is going to go a long way to starting to explain how we have got policy being made on a whole range of issues in this country, which just does not make common sense to ordinary people. These people are being blackmailed. I certainly believe that's the case. Patrick, if we can ask you to stay with us if you've got the time while we carry on through some other topics, and we'll invite you to comment if you're able to do that. Can you stay with us?
Brian? Yeah.
Okay, that's excellent. Well, I'm going to move on here to this subject, which ties in very nicely. The UK column put out an alert about a week ago for a lady called Holly Barker. This lady had been desperately trying to protect her child from abuse, and we've known Holly for some time, but roughly a week ago Holly called us very, very frightened because she had been sectioned, and in a number of telephone calls with her we have had the traumatic experience of hearing this very frightened lady being sectioned, being put into a psychiatric ward at Warnford Hospital, Oxford, and we are now very sure that actually she's being forcibly medicated. What is this mother's crime? Her crime is to have tried to protect her child from abuse, and of course in doing that this mother was starting to lift the lid on what she believed was a paedophile ring operating within Oxford. Now, interestingly enough, the UK column for a number of months, well, I think it's over a year now, in fact, has been reporting on very, very serious physical and sexual abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. This is on the doorstep of David Cameron's constituency, and despite all of the evidence put forward by students at that college and members of staff, absolutely no full investigation has taken place by the local Child Safeguarding Board or indeed Thames Valley Police. So we're just going to put out this update on this lady, Holly Barker, held within a ward at Warnford Hospital, and we know that this lady now has no contact with any friends or helpers because the psychiatric team have deemed that this is not good for her, and they have simply said that she can have contact from her family, but since her family are based in South Africa, this is of course impossible. So welcome to Britain in 2012. If you try to protect your child or speak out about paedophile activity, you can now be sectioned. We'll bring you a further update on that in due course. Moving across to what our politicians are up to, David Cameron has been hitting the headlines, having disappeared out to talk to Gulf leaders about selling 100 British-made fighter jet, of course worth billions. Now there's some very, very interesting articles, not only just in the Telegraph, but also reported in The Guardian, for example. And I'll just quote here from The Guardian, which says that Cameron has been irritated by claims that he uses his overseas trips to sell defence equipment to countries with questionable human rights records, and he's made arrangements to minimise the media coverage of the trip. Now, this is an extremely interesting statement. We have our Prime Minister going abroad to help with arms deals, and yet when the press quite rightly are trying to report on it, Mr. Cameron is trying to close down yet again on the free press. So we're going to say we're going to keep an eye on what Mr. Cameron is doing. Remember, of course, that Cameron and a team of arms dealers visited Egypt immediately after the Trouble. So this is part of a common policy by Mr. Cameron to help peddle the sales of arms in regions which are particularly unstable. If we follow up on that, Mr. Cameron is also taking a few hits in the press on the fact that more texts are emerging between him and Rebecca Brooks. And what the papers are finally starting to pick up on, of course, is that David Cameron appears to have deliberately withheld emails between himself and Rebecca from the Leveson inquiry, whilst at the same time he's pushing the Leveson inquiry to investigate everybody else. So we've either got pure hypocrisy here or something more sinister is at work, and we would certainly suggest that the real game of the Leveson inquiry is, having created a storm about phone hacking and about bad behaviour by the media, what Leveson's job is, in reality, is actually to now produce a very draconian set of rules to stop the mainstream press reporting. But I think with regard to Mr. Cameron, certainly hypocrisy is the correct way of describing it. Anything to add on that, Mike?
No. Keep going.
Brian, can I?
Yep. Go for it, Patrick.
Brian, I just wanted to add on the David Cameron arms dealing situation. It's important to see this incident in the context of a bigger trend, which is we saw Tony Blair doing exactly the same thing with the Saudi Arabian and the British aerospace and the backhanders. And what you have is the public electing a government, and then the prime minister using that position to act as a sales rep for certain military-industrial companies, and in effect they're auditioning for their career after they leave Downing Street to work for companies like the Carlyle Group and many other international consortiums. And again, this is resume building, CV building while you're in office on the public dime to secure your career after politics. It doesn't matter if it's Labour or it's Conservative. They both run the same agendas, and that's been proven time and time again. So if you think that you're on the good side of the left-right paradigm or the bad side, there is no good side or bad side. The two parties are working identically in their modus operandi, and that's been proven by this latest revelation about Cameron.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you for that. We've just been doing a little bit of reordering while you're talking, because we're on what we think is a very important thread with you here. But the Guardian's been reporting that the Syria's opposition have been failing to show a united front at a Qatar conference. It adds that the Syrian National Council refuses to support a US-backed plan that would sideline it, but may be forced to accept a compromise. So I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, this article, but the Guardian is certainly saying that all is not well in, obviously, the world elite's plan for a complete takeover of Syria. Would you be able to comment at all?
Well, when they first, when the West, the architects of the Syrian National Council, the main sponsors, individuals were Hillary Clinton and William Hague behind the scenes. And they hoped that by bolstering the Syrian National Council, which is a kind of illegitimate Vichy government held offshore in Paris, they would do exactly the same thing they did with Libya, with the Transnational Council, or the National Transition Council, sorry, in Libya, which they stuck into power, and it's been a complete disaster as a result. They're having a much more difficult time with Syria, with trying to construct their Vichy government that they will, in theory, put in place once they wreck and destabilize Syria and allow it to implode from within. And obviously, they're having trouble controlling their sort of ad hoc proxy guerrilla armies, which are being paid and funded from the West and from the Gulf states. We have people from this country and from the United States demanding that more arms be shipped in. In fact, Christopher Stevens, in Libya, who unfortunately met his death during the Benghazi incident on September 12th. There's allegations that he was in fact fixing the arms deals and shipping ex-Gaddafi arms stock to Syria. And that's something that makes quite a lot of sense if you look at the situation in Libya and Syria and the fact that right now, today, the training camps outside of Misrata training Libyan terrorists to go over and fight in Syria, and that 90% of the foreign fighters in Syria right now are foreign fighters. They're not Syrians.
Yeah.
So there's nothing legitimate at all about the West backing the civil war in Syria and the Gulf states as well. This is a bigger war crime than Libya in a way, because of the complicity of all these parties and doing it in such an illegal and underhanded fashion. I think this country in the United States should be ashamed at how they're even carrying out this crime, international crime. So
I think we could. Sorry, Patrick. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. If you look at how Libya has played out in terms of the post-Gaddafi period, it'll give you just a little indication of how chaotic and cutthroat it's going to be in Syria after the Assad government collapses.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we have got this incredible situation at the moment. I know that you're touching on world politics, but if we stay focused on Britain at the moment, we've got Britain where we cannot cope with our own economy, we can't cope with education, we've got our national health system falling apart, we've got an emerging chaos in this country, and yet we've still got British leaders going overseas as if they can solve problems in other countries. I mean, it's becoming ever more obvious that our senior politicians seem to believe, well, perhaps as Mr. Blair did, that they're on God's mission. But at home, we're seeing increasing chaos due to their incompetence or a far more sinister political agenda. What's your thoughts on money, Mike? Because at the end of the day, this is the root of all evil.
This is HSBC setting aside a further £500 million of their so-called profits for paying the fines that they're going to receive as a result of money laundering from Mexican drug money. But of course, HSBC has been at the centre of drugs money laundering for 200 or 300 years now. The British Empire, which was the British East India Company, used the opium trade. We fought 2 wars in China over the opium trade. This is a fundamental part of our British history, and certainly since the Glorious Revolution. It's a fundamental part of the establishment, the elites of Britain for 200 or 300 years, and the HSBC, which is set up as the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, was centrally involved in the Chinese opium trade, certainly since the end of the 18th century. Yeah. The key figures that set up that were working in the British East India Company at the time, the likes of Thomas Malthus, who we know was a eugenicist, Adam Smith, the economist that everybody reveres these days. But another key figure was Jeremy Bentham, who is considered by the Liberal Democrat Party to be absolutely a primary source of liberal thought. Jeremy Bentham, he's considered a gay icon because he wrote a book called In Defense of Pederasty, and we're getting back into children again. Yeah. This primary source of liberal thought was also proposing that prisons should be set up so that criminals, what he called the indigent and the retarded, and their children should be in prisons, forced labour. Yeah. So this is has been for several hundred years the absolute fundamental basis of British government.
Yeah, so we dig deeper into what's happening politically. Of course, we come to who's funding this, and when we really start to look into the history of the monetary system, we're coming back to not only people involved with huge amounts of money, but people who had political opinions and agendas.
Right, and so it should be no surprise that the HSBC is having to pay fines for laundering money, because that's been their raison d'etre from the beginning.
Yeah, and I'll just quote here from the Guardian. It says, Standard Chartered has also come under scrutiny for allowing terrorists and criminals access to its banking facility, while Barclays admitted playing a part in the libel rigging scandal. And of course, we would remind viewers that a gentleman called Marcus Agius, chairman of Barclays, has also been paid £48,000 for 27 days work a year by the BBC Trust. So not only have we got the BBC involved with paedophile activity and the abuse of children, but if we start to look at who is actually helping to control BBC reporting policy, we come straight back into not only the banking cartels, but via Mr. Chris Patten, common purpose supporting British politicians. The article goes on to say that the Royal Bank of Scotland is expected to be fined for its part in the libel scandal, and Barclays faces another potential fine following claims it rigged the price of electricity in the US. So it's quite remarkable stuff. This is not reported on mainstream media. It is being reported in the press, but when you draw the picture together, we've got absolutely fraudulent, corrupt international banking cartels who are manipulating not only the media but politicians as well. And certainly if we come to people who know what is really going on in the abuse world, what we are saying is that these financial institutions, of course, do have the money to get this world system of child trafficking and abuse operating, so follow the money. We'll just do another couple of articles. We know we've run over time, but that's the beauty of UK Column Live, flexibility and no licence fees. We've had some interesting information coming up over the EU at the moment, and of course we've apparently seen a split in the Tory party as EU rebels have actually sided with Labour to vote against the government. Now this seems to be a very extraordinary situation, because rebels sided with Labour and in particular Ed Balls. We should remember that Mr. Balls is a strong supporter and attendee of the Bilderberg group. So there's something going on below the surface here. It appears that the public is being given a puppet show that yes, there's revolt in the Tory camp over the EU, but can it really be true that we've got hardline Tories mixing it with the likes of Ed Balls? Don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that, Mike.
Well, last week Ambrose Evans Pritchard made, I think he was the first person to break the news that Theresa May is intending to wipe out the Pillar 3 part of the European Treaty, which is all the legislative stuff. So there's clearly some repositioning going on within the Tory party and without. Pritchard's view was that she would probably opt back into most of what was most of the legislation that was supposed to come into force under Pillar 3. So it remains to be seen exactly how that's going to play out, but there's clearly some repositioning going on. It's going to be interesting to watch. Yeah,
well, perhaps we can just put a bit more emphasis on this for viewers and listeners, because of course what David Cameron and his colleagues are doing is are giving more and more public money to the EU. The EU, after 17 years, has still not got fully audited accounts, accounts that are signed off. So effectively, British public money is being given into the hands of an organisation which cannot account for that money. If this was happening at a local council level, this would be malfeasance in public office, which is a criminal offence. So could it be that the British Prime Minister and his colleagues are also now engaged in criminal activity by giving away public funds to the EU? We wait to see how that develops. Final story here relates to the subject of police commissioners. And of course, we've seen great turbulence in the police over recent years. We have the extraordinary position where the Association of Chief Police Officers, as a private company, are setting police policy. But we've now got additional turbulence with the vote on police and crime commissioners. And the Telegraph here is pointing out that just 1 in 7 people may vote for these so-called new police watchdog people. But of course the truth of the matter is that in many areas there's been great suspicion over the quality of the candidates, or indeed their political leanings, with one candidate actually being financed from the US. What is interesting with the Telegraph article here is that one of the comments about people voting for this system has come from a member of ACPO, and that's the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, Sarah Thornton. And we would like to highlight that this is the very same lady who was head of Thames Valley Police, has absolutely refused to undertake a full and proper inquiry into the abuse of young teenagers at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. And indeed, when the UK column has asked for comment from the press team within ACPO, they have simply passed that request on to Thames Valley Police, and as with the rest of the OC-VC abuse, there's been a stunning silence. So this is really the quality of the top level of our police. They're involved politically, they're trying to advise us, but when we look at the quality of the people offering the advice, it doesn't seem to stack up.
This whole this whole commissioner business has been a bit of a farce from the very beginning, with lots of candidates having to drop out from having criminal records in their past. But the key issue for me over the commissioner story is simply the fact that whereas previously we had the police committees in councils where we had elected representatives sitting and managing budgets and managing the police agenda, now this is going to be in the hands of a single person who notionally is elected every few years. Yeah. But of course, there's going to be very little accountability from this guy, because the only time from this position, because the only time that there is any accountability is the next time the election comes along. Yeah. It's placing a lot of power in the hands of one person. Absolutely.
Patrick, I think you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, I did. Look, this whole idea of police commissioners going sort of American style on organizing the police forces from the top down, I think if this is going to go in this direction, this country, and we can't stop it, one thing that people can do in their local constituencies is to demand publicly that these candidates must, because of the sensitivity of this position, must declare their membership into secret organizations, one of which would be Common Purpose. And I don't think that's a big request. I don't think that's a big ask. What's your thoughts on that, Brian?
Well, of course, I would certainly like to see all Common Purpose graduates fully declared. The worst offenders at the moment for blocking information on Common Purpose people are not only local authorities, but our very own Cabinet Office, where Francis Maud MP, who's supposedly been the champion of transparency within the Conservative Party, has clearly helped block the release of information about Common Purpose people within the government, and particularly those who are now training our top civil servants. And he's also refused to release information on contracts and funding. So Common Purpose is certainly one. Of course, many people would also say that we still need to ask the Freemasons for full disclosure as to who they are. But of course we had, I believe it's Jack Straw, more recently, who has suggested that of course judges do not need to declare whether they are involved with this sort of activity. So we're well aware that people may be involved in clubs or societies which are not doing anything wrong, but of course if you're not doing anything wrong, surely it's reasonable for the public to say, well, at least let us know which of the clubs you belong to. And I think Bilderberger would be another little club that should be fully disclosed to the public.
Yeah, let's just say it again. You know, the phrase that comes out every time they want to point another camera at us is you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, and I think that needs to be redirected straight back in that direction. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, well, we've overrun for time, so we're going to end UK Column Live today at this point. We'd just like to say, firstly, thank you very much to all of the TNS team who were in Dublin over the weekend. We travelled over and met with some really excellent people who are doing similar work in Ireland as to our work here in UK. And there was also a large contingent who travelled over from Scotland, and it was very, very interesting to hear them talking about what the Scottish people really think. Not only about events in Scotland, but the current drive for so-called independence as a region of the EU. And I'm sure that what the weekend's discussions have produced is a much tighter link-up with getting the truth out. So thank you very much for the invite, and well done in particular to the Irish team for all the good work that you are doing. Finally, we'll advertise that we're looking to do an extremely in-depth show on Thursday, so that's the 2 o'clock show, where we're going to be looking at what's really happening with the subject of child abuse, and we're going to be looking at the evidence that child abuse is being covered up with the help of people at very high level, not only in the British government, but also within the mainstream media, the BBC in particular. So do join us then. Thank you very much.
Nice.
Goodbye.